Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. I'm Amina,
And I'm Jake.
and we're editors at the Daily Targum.
Welcome to Targum Tea, a podcast which focuses on pop culture reviews and social media. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the new docu-series Tiger King: Murder, Mayhem, and Madness, directed by Eric Good and Rebecca Checklin. Spoilers beware.
Yeah, definitely major spoilers are coming up. So let's just talk a little bit about the series itself and what it's been about. Basically, the show follows Joe Exotic, who is this sort of like obviously Tiger King, right, Jake? Like he
He's
is,
the Tigers.
yeah, he is just like this gay, like, I mean, he describes himself as like a gay redneck, and he is like gun touting, like just a crazy, like, eclectic, eccentric figure,
Definitely.
and he basically owns a zoo, and the zoo is like pretty popular in Oklahoma, where he like situates himself, and he has like this really long running feud with this animal rights activist supposedly whose name is Carole Baskin.
Mm-hmm.
And what can we say about Carole Baskin?
Well, Carol's interesting to me. So she's part of PETA, which is I don't know what the abbreviation stands for, if I'm being honest, but they're an animal protection group, and a lot of people find that hypocritical because back in the day she ran a tiger zoo herself, full of wildlife and other things like that, with her husband. So a lot of people find that to be kind of hypocritical of her, and she tries to go after Joe Exotic a lot throughout the series. You know, try to take down his operation and all of that. And Joe obviously retaliates big time. If you've seen it, you know exactly what we're talking about. But in his videos, his very popular YouTube videos, Joe is constantly trashing Carole. I think at one point he actually reads her diary. I want to say that's in the third episode. Um, he just takes out her diary and starts reading it and saying all these personal things about Carole. And there's just this big feud going on, and there's clearly a lot of bad blood there, and it turns out for the worse in the end.
Oh, for sure. And like, so you just like start watching the show, and that's sort of the plot you get is like there are these people who own all of these large cats, and they are just basically up to all this like no good. Like they are up to all this mayhem, and it's just the documentary just follows that world. And honestly, it just gave me something more to stress about. Like I didn't even know that there was like this whole like world of people just having all these like exotic animals fighting all the time. Like I don't know about you, but
Well, I had no idea any of this was a thing. You know, I was surprised in the beginning when they were talking about how it's actually legal to own these animals a lot of the time. I don't know if they revised the law. Obviously, that's an issue that Joe had, and part of the reason why he would eventually run for office later on in the series. But it's ridiculous to me that people can own these animals legally. You know, like in New York City, I know they have laws against owning like monkeys and little things like that. But then you go out to Ohio and Oklahoma and you have people owning like lynx and bobcats and tigers, and it's just all right. And I think it's not surprising at all that people who own big cats are going to be people like Joe Exotic or Carole, who are a little nutty in the head. Because you have to be a little crazy to own a tiger in the first place. Like, no matter how good you are with it, you have to be a little nuts, in my opinion. And
oh,
that's just how I feel.
absolutely. I
I mean,
think that was like one of the main takeaways from the show is like everyone in this industry is a little bit like nutty, you know? And I think that the show itself, the series was just um like having the cast itself was just one of the smallest elements of the show, right? Like there was so much else going on. Like there's so much we could talk about. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to move right over into some like notable scenes and like other stuff that's going on in the show. So you talked a little bit about like this feud with Carole Baskin. Like let's just start unwrapping what's going on. Do you have any like favorite parts of the show when that
well,
happened?
the third episode when they were going into Carol's ex-husband, who unfortunately disappeared, or you know they think he's dead now, obviously because it's been 20 years since that happened. That was kind of wild to me because I feel like in the first two episodes you're kind of being shown that Joe is the weirdo here and he's kind of like the one who's a little crazy. But then we get into the third episode and they have a lot of valid evidence that hey, maybe Carole did have something to do with this disappearance. Now I'm not saying she did or didn't. Obviously we don't know, but they definitely don't show her to be like this innocent animal rights activist that we're kind of led to believe in the first two episodes. Especially when you start finding out that her husband had that restraining order against her.
Yeah,
And
first, how crazy was that? Like the she fully she fully murdered her husband. Like
yeah, like if you had to like get me to go one way, she definitely did. I mean, and then I realized when she was talking about her husband in those interviews that she was giving, like she didn't seem that upset about it, like the fact that her husband just kind of vanished. And if you look at it, he has a ton of money. They were fighting. It makes sense. It like I wouldn't blame Carol for doing it. You know, like it'd still be a bad thing to do, but like it makes sense that she did it.
I think that the documentary people did like a really good job creating it because the first few episodes I was sort of like a Carol stan. Like I hate to say it, I was just like, wow, like this baddie is like really fighting for animal rights, and she's
Yeah.
just going after Joe, and she's going to Congress, and she's wearing all these cool clothes. Like I kind of had to stand her,
Yeah.
and then it turns out she is exploiting like all of her like most of her employees. First
Mhm.
of all, she's exploiting these animals, and she also potentially murdered her husband.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like they did a good job showing that too. I feel like just one thing to talk about, I feel, is I forget the name, but the zookeeper who lost their arm to the tiger in the very beginning.
Oh yeah, South.
It was just fascinating to me how that was like a minor thing. Like they didn't really go into that.
Exactly,
Like the series is
exactly.
so crazy that someone losing their arm is just a
Like
minor
a
plot point.
minor detail. Honestly, like every time I explain the show to someone who hasn't watched it, I say one thing. Like for example, that I'll be like, yeah, like this zoo employee lost his arm, and like that is just a small like subplot of like this huge crazy show.
Right.
And I'm actually glad you mentioned that because Saf allegedly was being misgendered like throughout the entire documentary series, and apparently he goes by he/him
Mm-hmm.
pronouns. And in the show, like Joe was not using those pronouns, and like the documentary series
Yeah.
weren't using those either. Which
Well, if I'm being honest, when I watched it for the first time, I remember that I think they referred to him as a girl at one point, and that confused me myself because I had, they were misgendering him, so I had no idea, what the correct pronouns were. Sorry. Um, so I thought that was definitely concerning. Plus, if you, I haven't kept up too well with it on social media, but I'm sure if you go on Twitter, a ton of people are misgendering him as well. So
yeah,
but overall, that's I don't want to say it's a minor thing, but if you compare it to the rest of everything, it's funny how that gets buried under the rug compared to,
yeah.
for example, the Walmart truck full of expired meat. I mean,
Oh my god. Okay. I can literally go on and talk about this, but first of all, this like let's just break down this Walmart truck. So
mhm,
Joe Exotic basically said he spends less money on getting food for the animals than like other people like Doc Ansel. Oh my god, who's a whole other character we could be going into.
oh my
But
God,
he uses less money to feed his tigers, okay? And he basically like subscribes to Walmart truck, and it's like this all this expired meat. And the documentarists were asking like the employees, hey, did you like do you guys eat
mhm,
um from this truck? And they basically said yes. Like they're not getting proper pay. These employees are
oh,
getting like $150 a week,
a
getting
week.
their freaking arms like bit
Well,
off, and on top of that, they're eating off of like this meat truck, which shouldn't even be going to like tigers or animals, let alone like people. And later on in the series, Joe, like the staff members started to admit that the food that Joe was selling was actually from the meat truck too,
mhm.
which was just like mind blowing, and no one's even talking about that. Like I don't know.
Well, that shocked me when I saw that for the first time. Joe Exotic paying his employees like 125 bucks a week or whatever it was. Which I don't know how he does that legally because that's definitely below minimum wage if you consider the hours that they're working. But then they go to Carol, and you kind of see that she does something similar. She makes them work like 24/7, like on Christmas and all these things. It's just a weird industry to me. as we were talking about before, like, look, I've never owned any tigers, so I don't really know what the upkeep is, but it's ridiculous to me that these people are still getting away with this in terms of treating their employees so poorly. And Doc Antle, is that how you pronounce it? Yeah,
Yeah,
he's the worst. I mean, like, that
oh
was
my God. Don't even get me started on Doc Ansel. When he was talking in general, like the way that these like people were talking about their relationships with other like their romantic relationships with other people, that had me seriously concerned. I was like, what is going on? First of all, Doc Antle, the way he treated women was just like gross, and like he was basically like exploiting tiger cubs to get women. And so was Jeff Lowe, and so was like all of like that Tim guy. Tim Stark was doing it, and he was like talking about how he respects Doc Antle for the way he treats women. It was
yeah.
just gross. Um, but let's talk about Joe, Joe's relationships a little bit. Like those were really seriously concerning. Would
Joe, I feel
you
like
have any?
he's a good example of Stockholm Syndrome, which is where like people just like gravitate towards their abusers because they think that's like the only life they can live, basically, and that's like the best they can do. I mean, like the way he treated people is just so foreign to me. And again, that got like buried beneath all this other crazy stuff that was happening. I feel like if that was to focus, that could be like its own documentary, basically. Like
For
Joe's,
sure.
like unbelievable to me, honestly.
Yeah, so let's just like get into it a little bit. So
Mm,
his first husband basically admitted that he was straight, like he was always into girls or like since he was younger, and then Joe sort of like worked his magic or whatever, and they got married, and then the same thing sort of happened with Travis, and like um honest like it was just crazy because Travis like admitted that he was pretty much straight until like Joe sort of like picked him up. And then we obviously saw like what tragically happened to Travis.
mm.
And I don't know, did you have any I was that was like probably the moment where I was most shook was everything that went down with Travis because I really liked him and like I just felt so sorry for him and he was one of my favorite characters because like you could just tell like he had just such a great personality and stuff and he was like sort of I would say like just from watching it being totally like abused by Joe because like apparently he could not even like go outside or like leave the like do anything without Joe's permission and it was just so crazy. I don't know.
I don't even know where to start with all that. I think if you look at all of Joe's relationships, like including like romantic, his friends, and then his like work employee, like his yeah, employees, um, it's just like I don't understand how a person gets this much control over the other people he's with. I don't understand. I mean,
True.
maybe Cantel's right. Maybe tigers just are that sexy, and then everybody just gravitates.
Yeah.
But I just don't understand how people let that happen to themselves. I think all of these people, Carole, Doc, and Joe, they're just kind of like taking advantage of people who aren't that smart, don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of resources to help themselves. I think they're all kind of abusers in their own sense, and I think that's why we see a lot of the problems with their animals as well. You know, with these wildlife places that they're running. I feel like that kind of reflects in their human relationships too. That they're so used to running these zoos unethically that it kind of spills over into their interpersonal relationships as well. Like they don't really know a life other than exploiting things or using animals for selling them, making money off of them. They're really just so used to exploiting things that it kind of spills over into their real life as well.
Like I was thinking the same thing while I was watching it and I was noticing that it's all really about power too. Like if you were like holding over all this power over like these fantastic beasts, like wouldn't you think that would give you some sort of like power complex or something?
Exactly.
Like
Definitely a big ego trip there.
yeah.
I think that's that most blatantly shown when Joe runs for governor and eventually president.
Oh my God. Yeah. There was just so many I think the documentary was just so well done because there were just so many chilling scenes like
mhm.
that were used just even visually. There was like this one scene where like Joe was running for governor and he was like standing on top of like a truck or something and he was like wearing like some sort of Christmas lights around his neck and it was so dark and like the lights just kept blinking, and he just kept eerily waving. And I was like, this is such a good scene. Like, it was really well done, I think.
Yep, I definitely agree. It was well shot. And it had a good balance of being like a crime story and then like a wildlife story. I mean, I remember I used to watch like Steve Irwin on the Discovery Channel and all that, the Crocodile Hunter, and it reminded me of that in a much more perverse way. Obviously, Steve was a good guy, but these people are not. So I thought it had a lot of elements that it mixed together to make it like as engaging as it is. You have like the animal aspect. That's always interesting, no matter what you're talking about. I mean, people watch Planet Earth all the time. They see all these animals, and it's just interesting. It's very beautiful nature in that sense. But then you also have the crime part, and that kind of keeps you going.
Yeah.
And it's feud, and then you have all these personalities on screen that are just, ridiculously interesting. And this is gonna be weird, but I feel like Joe Exotic and his political aspirations, if you want to call them that, it's almost like Trump in a way. Like he has this cult personality behind.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
Wait, keep going. Yes, I'm so glad you said that.
So I'm not going to make too many political comments here, but if you look at Trump and you look at what drove his campaign in 2016 and later on this year, we'll probably see it again, is this big personality behind him, not actual like policy decisions or like a vision for the country, but just who he is and what he does. And in his 2016 campaign, that was all about, bullying his opponents basically. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, although it is bad. But if you look at that, it's all about the personality, the brand of Trump, being rich, being a bully, misogynistic, racist, all that. Like he has this big brand behind him. And I'm not saying that Joe is all those things, although he's definitely not a good person. But he also had a big cult of personality behind him. If you look at his YouTube videos, he was the wildlife guy. He kind of had this Oklahoma-y, that's probably a bad thing to say, but he had this like rural personality behind him. He was wild, obviously, we know that. If you just look at him, you can tell. But he had this big cult of personality behind him, and people rallied behind that rather than obviously his policy positions because he didn't really have any. He's not exactly a politician.
I think you make such a good point that like a lot of people weren't really connecting to, like as much as I would have liked to see, just because so much was happening in the documentary itself. But like as I was watching it, I was like, where have I seen this before? Like, where have I seen people like him using just like one figure to like Carole Baskin and his hate for Carole Baskin, like as a marketable like selling tool or marketable like.
Too. Like I think he's a terrible person. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like a lot of the people who do think that are thinking so for the wrong reasons, not because she exploits people or because she may have murdered her husband, but because she's a woman. She's the one who's going up against Joe and fighting him, and people just equate that to be. She's like, oh, nagging woman. Here she goes again with her PETA behind her, or PETA, however you pronounce that. But
for sure, I think just but she is just such a bad person.
She is.
Like, do you remember? Like she just ran Joe's family like into the ground, like financially, because he's like a really bad person too, because he put all of like the zoo properties and like other many money ventures in his mom's name or like other people in his family's name, and then Carole just went after him like lawsuit after lawsuit, and like his family was screwed because of that, which just sucks.
Well, I think Carole, one of the big things we see from her is her desire for money throughout the series. I mean, that's one of her big things. I mean, at first she runs this zoo with her very rich husband. Then he dies, wonder how. And now all of a sudden she flips. Now she's going after people who are doing the same thing that she did just because it happens to be the thing that will give her financial success at that point or give her notoriety. So I think when it comes to Carole, she's a bad person because she just follows the money. I think Joe Exotic's just a bad person because he's a bad person. And then, Doc Antle, he's just awful in every way. I think he was just born bad.
I mean, I just wanted to talk about like a few other characters I think are definitely worth mentioning. Let's talk about James Garretson. So he was one of my favorite characters too, because I thought he was just like a low-key like mastermind heist like king, because he was just behind so much, right?
Yeah.
So basically in the show he starts off as like this sort of like background character who's like involved in like these money ventures,
Right.
and basically he works with the CIA to help incriminate Joe Exotic, who was, I mean, arguably set up by Jeff Lowe.
Yeah.
And he like works with the CIA to, I guess, help put all of them away eventually. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah. You know what? That really goes. James really he goes along with my points here. I think they're all selfish people, but they just have different motivations.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess he did the right thing in the end, legally speaking, but I mean, there's no doubt that he was kind of a snake, and they're all kind of snakes in their own sense.
For sure. I mean, I think the story is like not over. Like,
definitely not.
I mean, Joe's in jail, but I think they are totally.
Joe has coronavirus.
Yeah, so
that's sad.
Apparently Joe has coronavirus, and isn't that just the most 2020 thing like you have ever seen?
Yeah. The only thing that can make that more 2020 is if like Joe's a Kobe fan or something. Like.
Or like, I don't even know. Like if it was like Joe Exotic met Joe Biden in prison and one of them gave each other corona. Like, I think that would just be icing on the cake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you think Joe should be in jail for 22 years?
I don't know. Like, I'm not like a legal expert, but just from watching it, I was just shook as to how many people weren't in jail that I think should have been. Like,
yeah, I mean, the whole like planning to kill Carole thing is bad. But just kind of
it was bad. Like, there was just Google Maps like searches that apparently Jeff Lowe was doing to set up Joe, which is like what? And like the Google map searches of her hiking trail, I think was what really like pushed a lot of the evidence to throw him in jail, you know? And that was what Jeff did.
Yeah, I don't think he should not be in jail. I don't know. It just reminded me of like, do you ever get into like an argument with a person over something, and then, like it could be anything, but then you just get like so angry at them that you're not even thinking correctly?
Yeah.
Like I feel like this is just like one of those feuds. Like it's just so nasty and like long-winded, and I mean just the way that he was insulting her on his YouTube channel was very funny to me. It was like it seemed like really petty. Like they were like exes of each other. Like they broke up and now they're just like trying to like drag each other down. Like,
yeah, they were dragging each other. Like there was just all hate. Like that's just like years of hate built up.
It's like a very long running feud, and they really are opposites in a way. I feel like, but like they're very similar, but like on the surface they're kind of opposites. Like. Yeah, I mean, Joe is like this gay redneck guy from Ohio, and then you have like Carole, who's like coming from a normal family. She kind of has like she gets married at a very young age, you know, in like a very superficial way. They're kind of opposites. Like Carole's more traditional in that sense, like in terms of her family life and all that. This makes me think like, is Joe's redneck? I don't like using that word, but is that persona like real, or is this something he just made to like promote his zoo? I don't really know what to believe when it comes to this guy because. As we were comparing him to Trump before, it's almost like he's a con man in that sense. Because the whole time, what he wants to really be is just be like really famous, right? That's one of his big things.
Yeah, I think that's like a really excellent point that you raised because he is totally like using every bit of his identity to like sell his like, sell his like mark, like sell himself and like sell this idea of himself. And I don't know. It also made me think about how many different, like, how much is going on in this country? Like, how many different types of people even are there that we just, like, don't even know, Like, this is all just going on in America, and we're just, like, so oblivious. I don't know. So one of my favorite characters was Rick Kirkham, and he was sort of, like, the cowboy, like, smoking his cigarette in, like, the Western sort of background, and he was like the reality TV show producer. Oh my God, that's something we totally forgot to talk about. Is like Joe wanted this reality TV show, and somehow like mysteriously all his footage was like destroyed, and a bunch of animals died in this fire. and people are like drawing Joe to it, or the reality TV show Rick person, for like deleting all this potentially like incriminating evidence, or even like trying to destroy Joe's reputation. But anyway, I just loved Rick Kirkham because he was just such a funny character. Like, I thought at first he was sort of narrating everything that was going on, and then it turns out like in the later episodes he was involved in like a case with Joe because he was like, he might have been responsible for burning down like all of the reality TV show content. And I just thought it was like he was a shifty narrator kind of, and I thought that was really well done and funny.
Social media response. I haven't been on social media too much just in general lately, but a couple days ago after I started to watch the series, I saw Tiger King tag trending on Twitter, and I forget what it was, but I clicked it, and what I saw was like a bunch of memes about Carole killing her husband. That's like the big thing I saw. Like, they were kind of like boomer memes, if you know what I mean. Like, they had like the big text and all that, which was funny to me. But yeah, that's like the big thing I feel like a lot of people were focusing on was Carole and her husband, and what happened there, because I definitely feel like that's one of the big things, like one of the big questions that we don't have answered by the end of the series. Like, they talk about it a lot in the third episode, but then, we're kind of left to interpret it on our own. Personally, I think she did kill him. Or I think she either killed him, maybe fed him to the tigers, or
Well,
or that he, like, or that he disappeared with all of his money and now he's just living in Puerto Rico or wherever he went, Costa Rica, and he's just chilling there on his money stacks. I mean, it's one of those two, but there's no way it was an accident. I can say that much.
yeah. On social media, I've seen the same thing, like all of that, and also like there's this one picture of Carole and her husband now, and like she is like in like a flower crown, like hair long as hell, and then she has her husband like on a leash, and he's pretending to be like a large animal, like a large cat of some sort. I don't even know what kind. And everyone was just like, out of all the things that happened in Tiger King, we forgot to bring this up. Like, it's like,
It's
what?
just,
It was.
it's like
There's so many disturbing things. Like, you don't even know where.
Yeah, it's like there's like an alien colony out there, and you're just getting like a series about them, and you just have no idea what the hell's going on, and you're trying to be open minded, but it's hard.
Yeah. Okay, so for the rating system that we do at Targum Tea is basically like out of 5 teacups, and 5 is obviously like the best, like spicy, hot tea, baddie, like everything good. Yeah, so I think I would give this documentary like literally a 4.5 maybe, because I thought it was so well done. I thought it was so interesting, and like I could not stop watching like this train wreck. You just can't look away.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. In terms of it being a train wreck that you kind of have to watch, I would give it 4 out of 5. I think it's very, very good, very well made. I do think that part of the reason why it's getting so much attention, though, is because everybody's trapped inside right now because of coronavirus.
True.
So, what else are you going to do than, like, watch Netflix and, do your work, I guess. But I definitely think it was very well made, very engaging, a lot of things to dissect here. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but, yeah, so definitely 4 out of 5.
I don't know if you saw, Jake, but Jeff Lowe said like on Twitter that there's going to be a new episode of Tiger King next week, just like added to Netflix. Yeah, so that's something to look forward to.
Definitely.
But yeah, that's all for today, guys. Join us next time on Targum Tea for more reviews, and make sure to follow the Daily Targum on our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube for more content. Bye.
Goodbye,
Stay safe,
folks.
everyone.